Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. After a long hiatus, both I and the guest that I'm going to present to you today have been very, very busy with various initiatives. But today it is very important that we discuss this topic. How has caste become an obsession in America, especially starting with schools, especially in universities, and then it is working its way into corporate. So to know all about this and what is the reality, let's welcome Nikunj Trivedi. Nikunj, namaskar.
Namaste.
And welcome to PGurus channel.
Good to be back here again.
Nikunj, always a pleasure to have you. And what we are seeing now being played out across campuses in America, I mean, I thought that we had beat back this caste thing when the county of Santa Clara, kind of opened a commission, talked about it, understood that there are much more depth here. They were completely out of the water. They closed it and they said, we are going to kick the can down the road for somebody else to look at it in more depth. And then there was also an attempt to reconstitute this board. All that is happening. We thought that that was done. Also, the state of California tried to sue Cisco on a particular caste discrimination case. Then they found out that they had everything wrong. The case was withdrawn. But I'm hearing that they are submitting this case. I mean, some people think that they have taxpayer money and they can spend it any way which they think it's fit. I'm sorry to ramble on here. I'm just setting the context. But now there are other university campuses. All of them coincidentally appear to have the same language and the same set of movers behind this thing. Nikunj, can you please bring us up to date on what is happening around this, and then what is CoHNA doing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's always a pleasure to be here, and lovely the conversation all the time. So just to kind of give everybody a context, right? If you sort of like rewind back to the summer of 2020, after the pandemic had begun, the first case of quote unquote caste discrimination that we heard of was the filing of a lawsuit against Cisco Systems for alleged discrimination by a manager. Basically, the case was saying that the manager discriminated against another employee who happened to be from a Dalit background. And then that case was kind of was kicked out of federal court. But just so you know, Sree Iyer ji, that it was actually filed in the Santa Clara County. So there is actually a case going on right now. Of course, that kicked off a whole lot of storm around the world. People automatically jumped into conclusions that, because the case was filed, this person's already guilty, even though there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. And the filings actually show how the manager, who is quote unquote Brahmin, first, and by the way, he doesn't claim himself to be a Brahmin, but just because he was born as a Brahmin, he actually provided opportunities for the so-called Dalit person to actually be going up the corporate ladder. He provided opportunities for this person. And even there's a lot, so I don't need to go into the details. The filings have already shown that, and we'll be talking more about that as we go in the future. But the point is, this Cisco Systems case kicked off a storm around this whole caste legislation and the conversations around caste. All of it based on a biased and a sort of a report that is heavily biased and anti-Hindu by a group called Equality Labs, and many people already know about them. Then the 𝗽𝗶𝗀𝘀𝘀𝗀 book came out on caste that made a lot of rounds. Then that continued. Then we had a bunch of universities who are starting to look at legislation. So Cal Poly, the Cal State system, looked at creating a policy around caste. That is still going on. UC Davis first had a student government. The student government of UC Davis passed a resolution asking for caste to be considered a category of discrimination. And then that was followed by UC Davis recently passing a policy around caste, I believe as of October, and which we will talk about that too. Similarly, you had the Harvard's Graduate Student Union passing a resolution on caste. You had Colby College in I believe it's in Maine, if I'm not mistaken, passed a resolution on caste. So there are a whole bunch of universities that are starting to look at this. And recently, University of California, UCSD, at San Diego, UCSD, actually their ethnic studies department also issued a statement that they caste-based, so they support legislation around banning caste-based discrimination. A lot of it based on very, very strong anti-Hindu narrative. So this is what's been going on since summer of last year till today, and we're in the midst of all this stuff. And so our team has been pushing back by writing rebuttals, by writing different types of articles, by talking to legislators, talking to policymakers at these universities, trying to have a conversation. So far, some of these policymakers have not engaged with us. So fair warning, we already tried to engage with you. Now, if we take additional steps and actions with the community, it's not that we did not try to engage with them. We have sent multiple emails to UC Davis, for example, asking for a conversation. And we're gonna go deeper into this, why this is so dangerously Hindu-phobic, and why we, as whether you're a parent, whether you're a student, whether you are alumni, or even just community organizers and community leaders, need to be concerned about this kind of growing, the mushrooming of this sort of like the urge to legislate around caste. So that's where we are right now.
One of the surprises for me, Nikunj, is that, you know, we think that we've answered these things. We understand what this is. First of all, the caste, the name itself is not native to India. It was something that the Portuguese brought along, and that caste means class, and this was more on the economic rungs. And then the British wanted to impose their system of class, where there were like 4 different types of classes in their administrative bureaucracy at that time. I'm talking about 1800s. And then they wanted to slot Indians also in that. And this caste thing came along. And in many cases, the interesting thing I'm hearing is in many parts of India, they were insisting that the names be, have a first name and a last name. And many Indians had a slightly different way of representing themselves. The way it used to be, and it is still in some parts of India, is your village name, your dad's name, and your name. That's the way it is, right? But then they wanted it backwards, and this thing just became a mess. Anyway, the long and short of it, Nikunj, is this: that many of these schools have a sociology department, and it is filled with left-thinking loonies. I can only say it that way because many of these people were born in India. They know the truth. If you don't know the truth, then they are ignorant, and they better resign their jobs. Because if you are in social studies, and if you don't know, if you haven't done the research, and if you think 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗃 is the one who's the ultimate authority, I'm sorry, you need to understand, you should have read Vedas, Sanskrit, Bhagavad Gita. I can go on in order to call yourself an expert. And I'm seeing again and again, some have, let's not use a second word, people are the ones who are sitting in judgment over what consists of Hinduism, caste, and so on and so forth. In a way, India has lost its narrative. We never said that if you want to know about Hinduism, you come to us, we will tell you. Because right now, it's the West that is looking at India. And this has been written by Rajiv Malhotra. I'm sorry to ramble on here. My question to you, Nikunj, is, you have all these things. The children who have been at their homes, they go to these campuses. Suddenly, they are faced with an onslaught of things that they never knew happened. For instance, somebody rants that, Holi is a racist festival and it should be banned. I mean, it just goes on and on. Where do they get this narrative from?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up because on November 4th of this year, there was a group called the Other Collective at UC Davis. They issued a call that basically told people not to celebrate Diwali because apparently celebrating Diwali, bursting fireworks, eating sweets, and having fun is casteist and violent against Muslims, Dalits, and Adivasis, etc. So this type of violent and dangerous rhetoric against the community is behind some of these legislations. The same people who are involved in the Other Collective were also involved in the UC Davis policy making. So there's a lot of connections, and the same group is also involved with Equality Labs. So you can see, and Equality Labs has gone on record to call Holi a casteist festival that celebrates the burning of a lower caste woman, which is completely inaccurate. So this it's not just isolated, right? There's a group of people who are working day in and day out to create this narrative, to peddle this narrative further, and going through the diversity and inclusion departments within different universities who are keen on not stepping on eggshells. Right. So the moment someone says, hey, I've been discriminated, this is what's going on, they're hyper sensitive to that. And they want to legislate everything around under the sun. but they don't take into account the impact of the legislation on other students. So in this particular situation, that's what happened. But this continued narrative, whether you look at Cal State resolution, whether you can look at UC Davis or UCSD, you have certain very important themes going on. Hinduism is responsible for the entire caste system and all the atrocities. Apparently, it was exactly 2,500 years ago. Okay, there's always this date that shows up. It's 2,500 years ago. I don't know where that date comes from, but I have my guesses. One of them is the so-called Aryan invasion theory and the peddling of that narrative that has been going on for so many years in the academic circles, both in the West and in India. You mentioned Roman Latapra, but there's a whole list of academics in America and in the Western world that peddle this theory, even though it's a very racist theory that has been used by Hitler, right? And was used by, if you look at Thomas Trotman's book, Aryans in British India, he talks about how the British actually used the Aryan invasion theory to govern India, set policies, things like that. And of course, it's a false theory. So the point I'm trying to make is there's a 2,500 year, it says it's a 2,500 year system. That's the one of the points that they use. But then they talk about how Brahmins have always suppressed everybody else around in the entire system, and how this is a fault of Hinduism. And they continue to go back into the Rig Veda, and they cite only one verse from the Purusha Suktam to show that there is some kind of a caste-based hierarchy in there, when the Purusha Suktam does not even talk about it. And there are 10,000 verses in the Rig Veda. There's only one verse that they keep quoting, right? If this was the case with any other religion, if you think about Christianity or Islam or Judaism, there will be a huge uproar that somebody has taken the Quran out of context, somebody has taken the Bible out of context to talk about justification of atrocities or jihad, etc. So the point is, why is it okay for Hindus? The reason is because Hindus are not challenging. Our kids don't have the right information, but also, where are the professors? Where are the scholars who should be on campuses and fight back? Even if you're not a practicing Hindu, if you are concerned about scholarly inquiry, if you're concerned about data and integrity, you should be questioning that. Who is this group? Why is this group really has their survey been verified? And Carnegie Endowment actually debunked the Equality Lab survey to show that there is no widespread caste discrimination in America. But truth doesn't matter here. As I had told somebody, it's not satyameva jayate, it's propaganda meva jayate, right? So it's not about the fact that you can come up with the truth. If your propaganda sells, you're going to be the winner. And that's exactly what's going on in America. There's a lot of propaganda that's being sold in the name of caste legislation by showing some widespread discrimination that just does not exist.
One of the unasked for advice to some of these university boards who are sitting in judgment over whether to allow caste or recognize it, should you not also reach out to the other side to get to know the truth? You people boast of IQs in excess of 125. I mean, some of you may even have off the charts IQ. That would mean that you have a lot of cognitive intelligence. What about your cultural intelligence? If you don't have it, don't you think it is important to develop one, or at least to go and reach out to somebody who may be able to shed some light on this? I'll give you an example. Most of these things are based on one individual from one lab. I don't want to even name that individual. That individual can't even pronounce her name properly. Second, this individual starts naming a newly appointed CEO of a social media company, casting him something that he is not. Just shows you the depth of ignorance this individual has, and you are framing policy based on these words. Yeah. Shocking. Nikunj, I don't know if you want to share the names, because I don't want to give more space to this individual and her organization than it deserves. But your thoughts?
No, I mean, we already know, it's Equality Labs. We talked about this, but let me give you. So there was in October when UC Davis passed the legislation, there was a Yahoo article that talked about how, after a presentation by Equality Labs, the head of diversity and inclusion or diversity and discrimination at UC Davis suddenly decided to include caste as part of the legislation, just based on one presentation. Okay, they did not bother to check what this group is about. Is there credibility behind it? Have they said anything that is very controversial, anti-Hindu, etc.? Nothing. They did not do any due diligence. But bam, just went ahead and passed a. This is very, very dangerous, according to me, because essentially whatever Hindus say, the hundreds or thousands of Hindu students that are on campus, it doesn't matter. they have already made up their mind, and we have tried to engage with that same person at UC Davis, and they have not gotten back to us. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff, and I can tell you what's really dangerous to me, Sree, is the way the language is. Okay, now let's talk about the language for a second. They talk about, so they've included caste discrimination as part of what they call national origin. Okay, so in the language it says race, ancestry, national origin, and in parentheses, in the brackets, it says caste or perceived caste. Okay, let me repeat that: caste or perceived caste. So first of all, you don't even understand what caste is. If I had to tell that same person, okay, tell me how many castes exist in India, do you know what the fact that the OBC, or other backward classes category, is different in different states. So in one state you may have one person who's considered OBC, in a different state is an entirely different category. Okay, how the hell are they going to manage that part? Now, the more dangerous part is perceived caste. So are you trying to tell me that just because somebody says that I was discriminated based on my perceived caste, that somebody misperceived it, that person is now violating university laws? And what the heck does a perceived caste mean in general? Are you going to perceive a particular caste to be something totally different based on whose interpretation? Who is the interlocutor here and who is the interpreter? And we know, based on the conversations that we had so far, they're going to look to organizations like Equality Labs to serve as the interpreters of this. So first, you have an anti-Hindu organization that is looking to now help in legislation. But not only are they helping, they're going to interpret what this means. And then, oh, by the way, let me also train you. That's what they're going to go. And that's what they're doing now. Not just in universities, but in corporate America as well. We have seen this happening at Microsoft. We have seen this happening at IBM. We have seen this happening at, I believe, Cisco as well. And I'm forgetting one more tech company. So at least 4 tech companies I know that have had some kind of caste training. And people who have come in are either people from Equality Labs or ones that are supported by Equality Labs. Okay, so people like Professor Ajanta Subramanian from Harvard University, who has gone on record to say that the United States, by default, the United States immigration laws guarantees caste-based discrimination. Okay, these are her words.
Where did that come from?
No, she
Where
actually
did that come from?
That's what she says in her article in Harvard Policy. There was an article in Harvard Policy Review where she's quoted saying that, you know, United States laws by default guarantee caste-based discrimination. I mean, when you have a Harvard professor saying this, imagine the impact of this, right? And by the way, she was the same person. If you remember last year when we protested against Harvard, it was her book that Harvard University was promoting, where they had a picture of a Brahmin crushing a bunch of black people, black figurines in a millstone. Okay, this was the picture that they used to promote her book on caste and technology and IITs and things like that. So you can see this kind of, all this, when you look at the pattern, right? The patterns are very clear. There's a group of these people who support each other. And by the way, she was also on the Santa Clara Commission's, the testimonials. Okay, so she testified in favor of passing caste, laws around caste-based discrimination.
So there is an ecosystem that has developed around a few individuals. They keep supporting each other's work. They are punching above their weight. They are trying to make themselves bigger than what they are, and they are lying through their teeth.
Absolutely.
We get all this stuff. Now, the silent majority, I'm talking about the 4 million Indian Americans, every parent's dream is to send his or her child to either the Ivy League schools or the UC schools, all of whom are the top tier. But then, are they now going to be prepared for this kind of barrage when they go to their universities? The kids are going to be facing a lot of disinformation. How do you think the parents have to prepare their children? I mean, some of the children are traumatized, Nikunj.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I told you the Holi against Hindutva issue that happened last year, then this call for boycotting Diwali. I mean, 2 of the most popular and most sacred and very universal and all-embracing cultural festivals and religious festivals of the Hindus have been basically disparaged as casteist and violent against minorities, right? I mean, this is crazy stuff that goes on college campuses. And if parents are thinking this is a joke, it's not a joke. I mean, this is really what's going on. You may not even understand this, because it starts in middle school, by the way. And we're doing some workshops around this, but it starts in middle school, where this information on caste, okay? So one girl who was in school, they had 6 pages to learn about Indian history and Hinduism was part of that and stuff. There were 33 mentions in that 6 pages, 33 mentions of caste. So what does a person learn? Hey, India is all about caste. Hinduism equals caste. Okay. This starts in middle school, goes into high school. By the time your kid is in high school, they've already made up their mind that Hinduism has some issues and Hinduism is all about caste. And by the way, if you happen to be a Brahmin by birth or something, you're even worse position because you are now considered the worst, sometimes even worse than Nazis. You know, they have actually made these statements online how Brahmins are actually worse than Nazis, and Brahminism or Hinduism is inspired Nazism, as we saw in the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. So this is the type of rhetoric. So now what can parents do? Well, first of all, you need to have a conversation with your kids. You need to sit down and say, hey, we are hearing these things. Are you hearing this? Some of them may not hear. Some of them may say, yeah, I heard it, but I dismiss it. Or you know what? You need to go deeper into it and say, what do you think about caste? How can I help you? What do you think about our family? And then you'll start to see that they may actually have already developed preconceived notions that, you know what, my ancestors were caste. I'm not casteist, but you know, my ancestors were probably casteist. Okay. And they used to like, basically like throw Dalits out, used to kill Dalits with impunity. And I'm going to quote the UCSD statement in a second, but just for parents to understand and our community to understand how dangerous this stuff is. But before that, parents need to sit down and have a dialogue. You also need to have a conversation with the university, because if you're going to send your child, you need to ask your child, that university, you can write a letter or you can have a conversation with the guidance counselors or the people at orientation saying, how safe is this university for my kid from practicing the religion? Can my child safely practice Hinduism and be proud of his or her heritage without being ridiculed, without being subjected to Hinduphobia, things like that? And I think that question needs to be asked before these issues come up. But when you read about these issues, go and send a message to the university administrators like, hey, I just saw you guys passing this resolution on caste. Did you consult Hindus? Who did you consult? Did you consult parents? How did you just blindly pass a resolution that can have an impact? Now, let me read the UCSD thing for a second. I think it's very important for parents to understand. So this was the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Davis. It says it opposes caste-based discrimination against all students, staff, and faculty. Okay, great. Now, against the commonly circulated idea that only South Asians, specifically Hindus, should care about caste, we understand caste as a 25-year-old system of dehumanization that made Dalits, those outside the Brahminical caste system, into untouchables, as non-humans who could be killed with impunity. Caste is a structure of violence that affects 1 billion people across the world, and blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, it goes into a 2018 caste survey by Equality Labs, talked about Dalits and this and that, all of these things. And then it goes into how our department's recognition is strengthening the anti-caste movement at UC Davis. There are no legal protections against caste. It allows for South Asians to unknowingly but structurally participate in caste-based violence by working with upper caste South Asian scholars, students, and administrators. Okay, and there's a lot more. So why did I bring this up? Because there are 2 or 3 points that I want to highlight. Number one, it talks about that 25-year-old again, that whole area.
2,500, right?
Yes.
2,500
year old, yes, which means that this thing started in 500 BC approximately. Okay, that's what they're saying. We don't need to get into what that historic evidence is, but it's just basically fabricated evidence. But most importantly, look at what they say here. They say that Dalits can be killed with impunity. So the system was so bad that Brahmins had this, or other people had like a unseen power that people can just go and kill as many Dalits as you want. Like, this is the type of dangerous stuff that is actually in the Department of Ethnic Studies. This is an actual department at University of California, San Diego, who is pushing for anti-caste policies. All right. Now, when I read this thing, I was shocked to see that actual department actually puts this together. And where did they get the information from? Again, Equality Labs, right? So you can see this pattern. UC Davis, UC Cal State University. So all the UCs and California has a major caste problem right now. Let's put it that way. But this is also spilling over into Harvard, for example. So while Harvard University has not officially passed the legislation, their graduate student union passed something. Now, what's interesting there is there was an article that came out and talked about how already students are coming up forward and saying that my professor gave me being a Dalit, gave me less time than an upper caste person. Now, let's talk about, if you're a professor, how the heck does that happen? Is there like on a Zoom call, is someone is asking you, hey, what's your caste? All right, or you're Dalit, so okay, let me give you 20 minutes now, and then you're upper caste, oh, you're going to get an hour. Okay, is someone standing outside the professor's office and monitoring? Okay, this guy went in, he's an upper caste, and therefore he got 1 hour. The other guy went in, oh, he's a Dalit, so he got only 15 minutes. And therefore you see upper caste people are getting more office time from the professors or favorable treatment. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is actually happening on campus. And this is the problem, right? And this is going to boil over to multiple universities, but then at the federal level. There's already discussions going on to include caste as a federally protected category. Again, let's put aside what's going on in India, the social dynamics in India. There's a lot of arguments that can be made, and India is taking care of its own things. But why are you dragging all this nonsense to the United States, where a reputed agency like Carnegie Endowment and repeated Hindu groups have already shown and said there is no rampant caste-based discrimination? But as I said, it's not satyameva jayate, it's propagandameva jayate. So the propaganda sells, and it continues to sell again and again. And there's a citation loop that happens. So, you know, one person cites the Equality Lab survey, the other person cites that person who cited the Equality Lab survey. So it builds upon itself, okay? And by the time, it's like the telephone game. You know, when we were kids in India, if you're grown up, you play that telephone game. And by the time the 30th person hears it, it's a completely different thing. So that's what's going on here too. So it's default assumed that this is the organization and these are the groups that are the right voices. And in corporate America, in college campuses, they are the ones who are driving the narrative. Unfortunately, Hindu parents, Hindu alumni, Hindu professors are not in the game. Many professors are scared to come out in the open. But guess what? Your job is on the line. You have a choice. Tomorrow morning, somebody can just accuse you of being a casteist, and your career is toast. Because if an article is published about you out there, somebody does a Google search on Professor Subramaniam or Professor Trivedi or something like that, and you have been accused of being casteist, you don't have to prove it or disprove it. There's an internet footprint out there about you, and your career is going to be on the line. If you're an employer, if you are a manager who has hired an Indian person, you're not checking their caste. You're not sitting there and saying, hey, let me ask your caste. Where did you come from? What village were you born? You may not even know. And remember, forget about people coming from India. What about people who have been born and raised here, or people like me who have been raised here, right? We have been in a situation where we have dealt with people who don't even profess to being a Hindu sometimes. So forget about being a casteist, right? But they happen to have a last name like Trivedi or Iyer, right? The two last names that were called out during the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference, right? You have that last name, somebody accuses you, what happens then? So many things to talk about here.
Well, both of us are famous. I guess they're taking pot shots at us, so that's fine. I consider myself an intellectual Kshatriya. I've gone past my, I might have an Iyer as a last name, but I consider myself as a Kshatriya. But anyway, Nikunj, thank you very much. I think the last few lines that you said, that this could impact your future, your career, your job. This is very, very important. I'm going to try and make sure that people watch this program and understand the import of what you are conveying. Because CoHNA as a nodal organization is getting all these things. I mean, many people perhaps didn't even know that all these universities, things that they covered for their children, are now actively seeding lies. And the people who are sitting in judgment over this, they don't seem to know, but they're not doing the due diligence that it takes to verify the facts. That's where I'm really, really sad.
Yeah, and again, see, the point is, if you were teaching this or if you're having a conversation, you don't need to be involved. But the fact that you're passing a policy that has an actual impact, you could be suspended from a university. Your career, your entire degree can be jeopardized if you are accused of something like this, right? If you're accused of being a racist, right? A professor can be obviously fired, but think about a university like a student, right? If a student has been accused of, let's say there's a Hindu organization on campus, okay? They are now accused of, hey, you know what? This Hindu organization did not allow Dalits. They don't have to prove anything. I mean, they may have denied admission because the person did not have a ticket, but they turned around. Now all of a sudden, this Hindu organization loses funding, they lose their reputation, and now they're considered castes without even getting a chance to prove themselves. Right? So the policy is my problem is not about like rhetoric or discussions, all that stuff happens. My problem is policy making. So if you decide to pass a policy that has an impact on my community, I have the right to question that. Okay? Just like any other community has a right to question. If there's a policy that's being passed that blames Hinduism for something, I have the right to stand up, and so do as parents. 10 years later, my daughter goes to college. If I find this stuff, I'm going to raise hell in the university, because my daughter can be impacted on this. And she's born and raised in America. She's an American citizen. And just because she has a last name, she has never, she has not even done anything to related anything in Indian politics or any of that stuff. So why does she have to be subjected to this?
And parents, teachers, who are watching this video, do make sure that you pass it on to those people who are actually making the decision, so that they have an understanding of what the other side of this is and what the truth is. The truth is something totally opposite to what you're being fed, especially by one lab, one woman who's the face of all this vituperative stuff. It's just sad when I listen to some of the testimonies. It's complete bag of lies. And this individual, I have my serious doubts whether she even set foot on India. I mean, the way she talks as if she knows everything, but I don't even think she set foot on India. So how can you say something that you have not experienced firsthand? So there are a lot of holes in these stories. Please do your homework, because one day, I'm telling you, this is going to come back to bite some of the bigger universities, especially those who are enjoying multi-billion-dollar endowments, because you don't want all that going up in smoke because somebody sat and made a bad call. Thank you very much, Nikunj. And as always, viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Namaskar.
Yeah, and join our workshop, because we have workshops on caste as well. In fact, tomorrow we have one as well. So you can check out cohna.org/decolonize. There's a lot of information on caste that we have created. And over the next, several, call it a year or 2 years or whatever it is, we're going to be doing a lot of these workshops and awareness events and things like that, so the community can get the information.
Thank you very much, Nikunj, for that information. Yes. And we will be sure to add that information in show more section. Namaskar.
Yes, namaskar.